Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Ali Mattu, and we are doing a live stream today. We're going to be talking about can stories, videos, TV shows, and movies help us to understand each other, connect across our differences, and cope with what's happening in the world right now. We're going to learn together. We're going to work through this together on this live stream. And to help me out, I have invited back a very good friend of mine. He has previously been on episodes about the psychology of video games. Am I teaching anyone anything? I believe was the second episode that my friend was on. I want to welcome Josué Cardona from the Geek Therapy, everything from the Geek Therapy, so much stuff. Welcome, Josué. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ali. I've missed you.
I've missed you in many ways. For those of you who might not know, which is probably most of you, Josué and I used to live together in New York, and now neither of us do. A lot has changed since we last lived together in the same city. Similarly, Josué, a lot has changed since I asked you to do this episode. The original idea a few months ago was I wanted to have you back on the PSYCH SHOW and to do a deep dive on what does this whole thing of geek therapy mean. Well, then the coronavirus hit, and we were both in a place where we couldn't really schedule anything. And then I invited you back. We scheduled another time, and we were going to do this deep dive into geek therapy. That was going to be today. And then things have changed a lot in the last 2 weeks. We saw more examples of violence against Black Americans, specifically Black men. We saw the murder of George Floyd. He was killed brutally, and that video was shared all over the world. And as a result, we've seen these protests occur not only over America, but across the whole world. So we decided to take this hour and focus it on something that might help us to connect with each other, learn about each other, and also develop compassion. So thank you, Josué, for being here and helping me with this very difficult challenge that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. I mean, or at least we're going to try.
We're going to do
I think that's
best.
all. Yeah, I mean, that's what I tell people. I mean, that's what everybody's saying, right? At least try to understand each other. And a lot of people seem to want to right now. So it's a good time to talk about this.
Yeah, Daisy Funda says, in many countries, scientific stuff isn't mainstream. It's politically dominated in India media. You know, I wish it was different here. A lot of scientific stuff is not dominated here either. In fact, racist ideas about certain groups of people being better than other groups of people, they're still sort of around, even in science. So we've got a lot of work to do, and thank you for being here, Daisy Funda, to help us to think through this. So question for all of you in watching live right now, and then for those of you who might be watching the replay as well, have you ever read, watched, or played something that helped you to understand the experience of a different community? Might be people that you haven't had much contact with, or you just really never really thought about. But did you ever experience some type of media and it changed your perspective on a community of people? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you about what that's been like. So, Josué.
I've never done this thing.
Oh, yeah. This is a YouTube thing. Well, you're a podcaster.
I know. Yeah.
You primarily podcast, and even you Twitch too, but Twitchers don't do this.
No, they don't do this. They go over there.
No. Oh, yeah. No, this is a YouTube thing. Depending on the size of the window, some people might need to go over there. Actually, wait. There.
You're right.
But in general, comment in the doobly blue below. So, Josué, I wanna do this. I want to get us started by really trying to understand this thing that you started many years ago and has exploded into this much larger community of people who are passionate about mental health, about therapists, about people who are passionate about pop culture. Geek Therapy. What is it?
So our motto is, so at Geek Therapy, our motto is that the best way to understand each other and ourselves is through the media we care about. And by care about, I mean something that makes you feel.
Mm.
Right? You recently told me, why I think it would be better if you said the media you love. And we used to say that, but I don't think that you have to love the media for it to be meaningful, for you to care about it, for it to mean something. And it's really something, if it makes you feel something, I think we can use that. Those concepts can be applied in many different ways. One of them is, and really what the basis of all of this came from, is that we rely on words and language to express how we think and how we feel. And that's really, really hard. You're going to see that happen for this hour, right? You're going to see me completely forget the words that I want to use and not be able to find the correct words. And it's hard sometimes. But sometimes we see something on TV, we might see something in a book, we might hear a song, and we think, that's it. That is exactly how I feel. Mm-hmm. I didn't have the words for it, but that's it. And then you can show that to someone. It's like, this is me, right? I've been trying to say it, but nobody understood me before. And now there's a version of that out there. Another part of it is being able to share how you feel and explain it so you can do that for other people. So then other people can find that and say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that's how I feel too. Mm-hmm. Another part is the reaction and the processing and the reflecting on the feelings that you get from watching something. You watch a scene in a movie and you're like, I love that. But other times you think, oh, wait a minute. I completely disagree with that. Why do I disagree with that? So when I was just starting off as a psychotherapist, I started doing this, like you said, I've been podcasting on this for years. I've been teaching this for years. Mm-hmm. And when it started, it was a reaction to a supervisor of mine who said, you can't use video games with kids. I said, wait a minute, but these kids love video games. This is the language that they speak. They love this. So in an act of rebellion, I went home and I created a website, right? geektherapy.com. I was like, no, I'm going to show you that there's a lot of research that supports that we can use these things that we care about to help people. Yeah. And the core of that, after years of speaking to many people and studying it and developing it, is that when we feel something, we can use that to understand each other. In a psychotherapy environment, that can be, you and I are working together. I'm your therapist. You're trying to tell me how you feel. And maybe you use certain words that mean something different to me. And we're not really understanding each other. And maybe I can't actually help you. But then maybe you say, oh, I read this comic book. There was this episode of Star Trek that just really hits home how I feel. And then you share that with me. And if I also like Star Trek, or if I don't, it makes it a little bit easier to know how you're feeling. And then it gives us a context that also makes it easier to discuss this thing that might be very, very difficult. So we have a Geek Therapy Discord right now that we have this thing going on where we have an emotional support channel. And people have started talking about current events, but it's so hard to talk about and find the words. We've been using gaming metaphors to discuss it. And we all know what we're saying. Like, oh yeah, like this country has a pay to win model, like, oh, like we really hope that there is a patch that comes in soon, Yeah.
Whoa.
It all started because someone said, I'm trying to return to a previous save point and the game won't let me. And then people started answering, well, have you tried lowering the difficulty? It's like, yeah, it doesn't work. I don't know why. It's one of those games where you can't do that. And so we all know, like, we all understand it so well because that particular group of people, they're all gamers. They really understand this. So
I'm hearing a lot of things here in the Geek Therapy model. Yeah. One is finding stories that you connect with can be really validating. They can help you to make sense of your own experience, that I'm not alone in this, that this is not just Ali Mattu thing, that this is something that a lot of people experience. That can also help you to help someone else to understand what the experience is like. Like, we're getting a lot of love for the book and maybe the movie as well, The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas, and how that story helped people to understand the experience of being Black in America. And so stories can also help us to share the experience, and there is empathy in that. Like, something that a concept that really opened my mind is parasocial relationships. The relationships that we have that are one way, that I think a lot of people who I've never met, who might watch my videos, or a lot of people who listen to your podcast every week. They have a relationship with you. They have a connection with you, even if they haven't met you in person, even if they've never messaged you. There is a relationship there, and those relationships are important. They can have an impact on you. If I share something about something that's going well, I think people who have a relationship with me, even if it's a parasocial relationship, they're going to feel good. Or if I share something, like I hear this a lot. I made a video when a dog that I love passed away. A lot of people have messaged me about that like, I am so sorry for your loss, and thank you for making this video. I understand this issue better. So even those relationships aren't real in the sense that we're seeing each other in person, those relationships still matter, and they can still have an impact on you. And the last thing I'm hearing about, Josué, I'm doing the annoying therapist thing where I just reflect back what you said.
Every single thing. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I can't get the therapist out of me. But the other thing you said is community. When you said, I want to return, people are talking about, I want to return to a save point, or the difficulty is too high in America. Like, you're sharing analogies based upon video games, but I immediately sort of get it. I get what you're talking about. So Geek Therapy is all these different things that am I getting it right?
Yeah, and the component, the final piece of it is the reflection and processing on the feelings. Like the parasocial relationships, yeah, they're meaningful because they make us feel something. Mm-hmm. Right? We feel for those people. We might see ourselves in them. And then this is what mostly happens, especially in binge watching culture, right? We watch something, we watch 10 episodes in a row. We felt something, but we just go on to the next thing. We don't take a break to really try to process and think, oh, wait a minute. Why do I feel this way? Why did that make me sad? Why did that make me happy? Why was I so happy when the heroes won? Why was I so sad when that villain was defeated? Was I so sad by that loss or by that win? And then being able to take the time to reflect upon that. Imagine in a therapeutic setting, and not just with a therapist, but imagine just like a teacher or speaking with parents or with friends, taking the time to reflect on that is amazing, because you already have this safe context to discuss the topic in. It's like, oh yeah, no, plus we both just saw this movie. Yeah. So our lives may be completely different, our context may be completely different, but we just shared in that movie experience, and then we can have a discussion about other topics, about real things happening in the world or happening to us in this safe environment. And being able to take advantage of that's what Geek Therapy is.
So, in Insightful, I hear a little bit earlier mentioned conspiracy stuff is much more attractive to most people here in Pakistan than the scientific stuff. My Pakistanis are representing in the chat today. And I think this kind of ties in, like we're really wired to understand stories. We're wired to think in terms of stories. There's really cool research on how well people are able to read and understand information, and if you give it to them in a textbook form or story form, you don't need as much attention or focus or literacy skills to be able to digest information when it's presented as a story. Right. Easier way to say that, it's much easier to understand information when it comes to you at a story. And Insightful I think that's true around the world, is we're really we're wired to understand stories, and sometimes those stories can be weaponized as conspiracy stories, because so often the story of science is that it's unwritten, it's uncertain, there's a lot of questions, and conspiracy theories can give us more definitive answers. But this is also where I think fiction is so helpful. And we're not just talking about fiction here, Josué. We're talking about Geek Therapy isn't just about understanding fictional stories, but real life stories as well. I think that's something you and I are going to get into. It's really important for us to discover, understand stories, to fill in those gaps in knowledge so that other conspiracy stuff or weird stuff doesn't fill in those gaps. Like we need good, compelling stories that are honest and true to the experiences of different communities.
I mean, just a double-edged sword here, right? Just consuming the media on its own. I think there can be benefits to it. There can be a lot of self-reflection and understanding that can come just from that experience that you have personally with the media that you encounter. And again, media can be any kind of art or information presentation, right? So we're
Could
talking
be a
movies, video
song,
games, could be
video,
music,
YouTube channel.
a painting, right?
Yeah,
TikTok,
yeah,
anything.
TikTok.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a
No,
lot
no,
about
totally,
TikTok actually in the
totally. All
future.
right,
Yeah,
well, we
yeah,
can talk TikTok.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, go for it, Josué. I don't want to cut
no,
you
you,
off there.
you interrupted me, and now I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, Rose brings up an interesting point where Rose is saying that watching the last 2 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine helped me to expect the death of my dad. And today I went to the grave. And so this Rose is speaking about how watching something, experiencing some type of media, not only can help you understand experiences that you've already been through, as you were mentioning, Josué, but it can also help you to understand experiences that maybe you haven't had yet, or maybe it could help you to get some context or preparation, or just start thinking about things that might happen to you in your life.
Yeah, so you're practicing, right? There are many things that we only try to prepare for through simulation, through practice, through thinking about it. We never know exactly what it's going to be like to have that experience. We talk about that in video games a lot. You're simulating this act of either getting stronger or building up defenses. I think with TV and movies, you get the same thing. It's like, we did an episode recently where we talked about death, exactly. And I don't have a lot of close people in my family who have died. But when it finally happened, it didn't feel so foreign because I had lost so many relationships, so many people that were meaningful to me in my TV shows, in my video games, in my movies. I felt sad. I felt a sense of loss. It wasn't the same, but it was real. Well, and it did feel like I practiced.
I'm guessing also you probably experienced the loss. This gets back to parasocial relationships. You have probably experienced the loss of actors, of creators, of artists. I think about when Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Spock, died. I mean, that was real grief for me, Josué. I found out about that in the middle of the day when I was at work, and I was really distraught. And I found another Trekkie that I work with, and we went into the room together, and we just cried together, and we just talked about it. And I never met him. I never met him in my life, but he was a constant presence in my life. Insightful Eye says it's so difficult to actually understand a different culture without first cultivating cognitive and emotional empathy. And I agree with this, that getting over some of our prejudice, it requires not only having contact with another group, understanding them, but then developing empathy. And this is one way to that, right, Josué? This is like the media that we consume is one way to develop some empathy, especially if you might live in a place or your circumstances make it hard for you to have contact with that community.
Yeah, absolutely. I've met people who tell me, I'd never met another Hispanic person before. Or I've never met a black person. Or I've seen so few that I don't know what it's like. And at least now in 2020, I can point to many different black voices and YouTube channels and creators, right? Where it's like they're out there. Like you can hear from them even if you don't know them personally. Those stories are out there, fictional and nonfiction.
Yeah, Daisy Fundo is responding with acceptance and tolerance too, and I've for a long time I've thought about that, about tolerance, and now I'm kind of, the events of this week have kind of switched gears for me from how do you move from beyond understanding and tolerance to anti-racism, to fighting for equality. And since a lot of my Daisies are in the house in the comments section, speaking from my own life, I grew up, my family's from Pakistan, and I grew up with a lot of subtle and sometimes more explicit anti-Indian or anti-Hindu bias. And so it's taken me a long time. And one of my best friends is his family's Indian and Hindu. So it's taken me a long time to move from, it's not just about understanding, but how do I push forward and fight for equality, anti-racism? And so that's where I want to get to the conversation here, Josué. How does geek therapy, how does this idea of media and the stories that not only do we love, but that we experience, how does this relate to now, these past few weeks, the racial violence, the police brutality, the violence against Black Americans, specifically Black men, Black Lives Matter, this movement? How does it relate to now?
Yeah. It's hard work, right? Tolerance, acceptance, anti-racism. It's hard work, right? It's stuff that you have to. There are ways to do it. It's not easy. It's hard. It's really hard, yeah. Right? And so, what I'm presenting is a way to, I feel, help facilitate that, right? We have the ability now to share different experiences, and it's important that we talk about different experiences because one story isn't enough.
Yeah.
You know, like because one person's experience is very different from another person's experience. Right. I mean, this has probably happened to you too, where you see your culture represented on television, whether it's your religion, your culture, your place of origin, and you think that is not my experience whatsoever.
Yeah, totally.
And if it's the only one, it feels, it can almost feel offensive, right? It's like that doesn't represent me.
Yeah.
But it might represent someone like you. That's just not your experience. So it's important to have many, many different experiences out there.
Yeah. And
right now, what we're talking about is victims of oppression, victims of racism, right? We're all agreeing, okay, let's listen to these voices. But those voices are here. They've been here, right? They've been talking. Right. They've been speaking for decades. There are books, there are movies, there are interviews, there are videos, there are podcasts. They're out there. And so I invite people that if you want to understand another person, look for that, and don't just look for one voice. You know, look for, if you find a story of a Black family on television, also look for the reactions from different Black people, so you see how accurate it is, if it is or if it isn't. That's where the understanding comes from. It doesn't come just from watching and then accepting that that's the truth. It comes from seeing that there are many different versions of this.
Yeah.
And I invite people to reflect, right, on their own experience. Like, have you ever seen, you know, something even as broad as gender? It's like, oh, like that man doesn't represent me, that woman doesn't represent me, right? Yeah. So imagine taking that finer, you know, focusing in more and saying, like, in my case, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm like, oh, like those Puerto Ricans don't represent me. I'm nothing like that, or my family isn't like that. Right. But that doesn't mean that those experiences aren't real, that those stories aren't true. They're just different. So getting access to many different stories, being open to them, and being able to hear reflections on them from other people who are similar and can relate is where the understanding can happen. That's where the work happens.
I love that idea that we really need a diversity of stories to get closer and closer to a better understanding and more empathy and more compassion. I obviously can't speak to the experience of being Black in the United States. My experience as being South Asian in the United States, there are some works that have better connected with me, like The Namesake was one that I watched and I really connected with. And then there's others that seem like so off the mark to me, like Never Have I Ever, which just came out on Netflix. That just does not, there was a lot to that I just felt like, no, you're missing so much. But you bring up such a great point here, which is that might resonate with someone. And we need more and more of these different types of stories to better understand the variety of experiences that you have. But you bring up your comment about, don't just read that or don't just watch that, but then look at what have the voices in the community said about it. I love that point because that is, it's such a great way we can begin to understand the diversity of experience within a community. You know, that's the thing about race in the United States, and I know it's different around the world, but in the United States, we have, as a matter of policy, put people into these different categories. And those categories are completely fake. Like there's no there's no biological reason, there's no biological basis of race, and there's more differences within racial groups than there are in between them. So no one thing is ever going to capture that experience of what a whole community is like, because there's so many different experiences in a community. But if you look at the discourse, the conversation, that's such a great tip, Josué, of how we can move closer to getting more compassion, more understanding. So I want to take this question, and I want to ask the audience here, because I'm very curious what everyone watching is going to say. What are some of your favorite shows? So let's kind of move this from like a more theoretical. Let's make this a little bit more hands-on and practical. So I'm curious what stuff other people have been watching, and if we can do a little bit of a geek therapy analysis here. The reason I bring this up for everyone watching is, as we are prepping for this live stream, I asked Josué to watch a video I made a few weeks ago. That video is called TV for Your Mental Health. Now, since so many people around the world are sheltering in place, or their lives have been disrupted by the coronavirus, COVID-19, a lot of us are watching a lot more TV than we probably were a few months ago. So I wanted to make a video that shows how we can use that TV to help improve our mental health, help us to cope, help us to connect, help us to get through this difficult time. You can see that video in the description below is the link there. I did again, Josué, see? The description's down there. So you got a point. Otherwise people are going to be like, where's the description? Is it up there? Is it over here? Is it here? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I gave that video to Josué to watch, and then Josué, what was your reaction?
I was I had a tally going as you kept listing off the shows, and I made the observation that every single show had either white protagonists or a predominantly white cast, with the exception of The Mandalorian, who has a Hispanic lead, but like he never shows his face, which I also thought that was interesting. Yeah, and I mean there were a few other examples, but like for example, you mentioned This Is Us, right? And if we're talking about the Black experience, the one Black protagonist in any of those shows you mentioned was Randall, right? The character of Randall in This Is Us, and he is someone who was dropped off at a fire station as a baby and adopted by a white family and raised with two white twins who were all born on the same day. That is not a universal Black experience.
No.
And if that is your only, I mean, and then like the show actually touches on a lot of that, but that is an experience that some people have, like not so specific, right? But being raised by a family of a different culture and what that means and what you experience. But that is, if that's the only one you've watched, then I don't know. I think that there was something about the broad spectrum of the shows that you presented that stood out to me in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, I think you also said, other than that, Ali, it's a good video. I want to get the credit.
Yeah. Credit where it's due. I think I agree with what you said. I was just surprised by the examples in the context of this conversation.
And I was surprised by that too. And that was something I did not notice until you reflected back to me. And now looking at it with a June 2020 lens, I think I made that video in late March or early April or something like that. But looking at it from a June lens, I'm looking at it completely differently. And I'm so happy that you were able to bring that to my attention, because I might not have noticed that is a blind spot. Like I've become very much aware of a lot of different blind spots I have. Like this week, it became very obvious to me that my Twitter feed is largely white. Like a lot of the people I follow are therapists, mental health experts, journalists, scientists, science communicators, and then actors and a lot of mental health advocates. But most of those people are white, and as a lot of people were sharing different voices that have always been there, right? People have been tweeting for years and years and years. But because of my own blind spots, am only now discovering them. My eyes were open to so many different perspectives that I'd never seen before. Like, people were what I'd loved so much about this week, and I'm happy to share some of those people I'm now following on Twitter. If anyone wants to ask me on Twitter, happy to share those handles. But like, criticisms of mental health, of science, of academia. Like, this one person wrote a wonderful takedown of the GREs and how this is a graduate entrance admission test in the United States, and how the GREs are really racially biased. And I knew some of that as it relates to the SATs, which is the undergraduate college admission, but not the GREs. So I've learned so much, and my eyes have been open to the blind spots I have in my media, not just my traditional media like TV and film, but also new media. And I think part of that, Josué, comes to a lot of the shows I was recommending in that video. I was trying to recommend a lot of shows that are like comfort watching that people have probably seen before. So I was heavily biased towards older shows. And like, you're right, no white protagonists in most. I mean, I think the closest I get to, besides This Is Us, is Battlestar Galactica, which you could argue Eddie Olmos is one of the main leads, but it's much more of a there's a wide variety of people who are the leads in that show, so I don't think that really counts. But if we
also, but narratively, he's not like
Right.
narratively. It never comes up that he's Mexican. We know that he's a Mexican
Right.
actor, but that doesn't come up in the show.
Yeah, and that's a difference of who are the actors who are in the roles, and do those stories speak to these differences? Like,
Yeah.
this was
Different types of representation.
Yes. Like, the shows I'm watching right now, like last night, I watched 2 episodes of Atlanta. And a few weeks ago, we were talking about Gentified, also known as
Hentified.
Gentified. And we have a little fun debate we had about, like, how do you refer to that show? But those are 2 shows that are written by people who represent the community that the show is about, with actors who are also from those communities as well. Like, a completely different vibe than everything else I've mentioned in that video. So, yeah, I mean, that was really eye-opening to me. So I have to thank you for I don't want to say calling me out, because that makes it seem like, hey, Ali, I gotcha. You said and did this, but you mentioned it. You're a guy I trust. We're friends. We have this relationship, and you brought this up. Like, hey, Ali, I don't know if you noticed this, but you did it in a way that helped me to become aware of, oh man, this is a total blind spot for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's happening a lot. That's the importance of what's happening right now. We're having these conversations that are always happening, are always going on. On Geek Therapy, we talk about representation, this type of thing, all the time, because of how important it is, because it's key to this idea of being able to understand each other.
Yeah.
If there's no version of me that I'm able to see in a positive light in any sort of media, that does something to me. It also makes it harder for me to share with people how I feel, because it may be harder to connect.
I want to give a shout out to Dr. Harry McCleary in the comments section, who had a wonderful comment. I agree. What is often missed is the diversity within single cultural identity. Some black men like Star Wars, some like Star Trek, and some, dare I say, don't care. And we could have that debate too, which I'm always down for. But Dr. McCleary, one thing that you mentioned here that Josué, you mentioned as well, in our pre-show, is Star Trek, and how Star Trek is seen as this utopian future, and where all of humanity works together. But then you had a very powerful criticism of that. I'm wondering if you could share that here, and if you don't remember, I can prompt you, but I think you'll remember what we were talking about.
Yeah, that Star Trek presents a utopia, right? That is, it sounds great. it's a utopia where apparently race isn't a problem. We got rid of it. We got rid of racism. It's perfect. It never comes up, and that can be hard to digest and hard to accept right now. And so instead of, while we celebrate the fact that the cast is diverse, and we celebrate the idea that that is a possible future, it completely erases the opportunity to discuss it on Earth. Like, I think Star Trek does actually touch on these topics with alien races, and then it becomes a metaphorical discussion.
Yeah.
But with on Earth, it's like, no, we solved that. We fixed it. It's cool.
Yeah.
So we don't have to talk about it.
And I think we can make a similar criticism of Star Wars is the differences within humans. I don't know if they're called humans in Star Wars. I don't. My knowledge of Star Wars is more limited than Star Trek, but it's much more about one species versus another species. And I never really thought about that criticism. One way to think about it is maybe in that future Star Trek, they have dismantled all the structural problems of racism, like the institutions have been rebuilt. And the characters do talk about racism only when they go back in time and they visit 20th century Earth and they're like, what is going on with these humans? What's wrong with them?
Glad we fixed that, and we don't have to deal with it in most episodes.
The only character who really gets to my favorite Star Trek, which is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is really a story about a black family. And Captain Sisko in one episode, actually in about 2 episodes, does speak to racism more directly, but that's about it. So I think that's a very powerful criticism, and that really opened up my mind. And you and I had these conversations as it relates to media, like, because we were talking, right? It's kind of like the whole thing we're talking about here. Like, it is very hard to talk about race when you are living in a racist society. And what I mean by racist society is when there are these structures that are decades old, hundreds of years old, when it's written in our Constitution of the United States that all men are created equal, but not everyone was considered a man and a human. And we have the history of the 3/5 compromise. We could go into history here, but there are these structures in place that do discriminate against people. And it is hard to have these conversations in America. And it's talking about this media, talking about our blind spots, talking about these stories, what resonate. Josué, it makes it easier for me, man. It makes it easier to have these conversations, and then those conversations can go deeper into other issues. So I thank you again for that. The comment section, I am behind on the comment section, but a lot of wonderful comments are coming here about different things that people are watching. Ahmed says, just watch a British TV show called Trying on Apple TV, a beautiful story. I think that is a story. My wife was watching that, and I was like half watching it. I think it's a story about a couple who are trying to have a child and are trying to adopt a child. Were there any people of color, Ahmed, on that show? I don't remember seeing any. But
right.
Let me know.
Going back to the question, right? We put it to everybody to see if we saw the same thing. If you bring up all the shows you're watching right now, it's like, oh, right. Like, is there any diversity in the shows that I'm watching? Yeah. And depending on where you are in the world, that is different, right? It's like, oh yeah, everybody is from the same place. Everybody is sharing a similar experience. How diverse are those stories that we're being exposed to?
Yeah.
In any given moment, right? Like any given moment, it's interesting because you can go back and you can always say, like, oh no, yeah, I saw this show about this type of family. But like right now, what are you being exposed to?
Yeah, Daisy Funda says my favorite Bollywood movie, Amar Akbar Anthony, is a very interreligious love story. So that is an important aspect of diversity here. Rose mentions Red Dwarf, and I don't know Red Dwarf well, but then let's think about, like, who are the characters featured? What stories are they featured? Red Dwarf is a science fiction story, and I think science fiction so often...
A comedy science fiction story.
It's very unique. And not only comedy, but it's British humor, which is another cultural flavor there. But I think that can be a weakness of a lot of science fiction, is they might they might see things in a bit more colorblind way, or it is all metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, like Star Wars for me, I mean, it isn't Earth, it isn't
Yeah.
our history, so it's a little different, right? To put that together. But Doctor Who kind of is really interesting because you'll travel back in time, and then it's like the past is always diverse. You know, it's like I mean, in the newer shows, not back in the not
not the 60s.
not 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's and I always found it, again, it's both things. It's like, oh, it's great that there's a diversity of characters playing these historical figures. But wait a minute, but did we just are we ignoring the fact that this was impossible back then? Are we
Right.
are we somehow celebrating it? Are we not going to address that this can't be? I think that only when Martha was the companion, that like they traveled back in time and they addressed the issue, like, oh, she's a black woman traveling back in time and into these places and situations, and people are gonna think something is off. But after that, it's like,
well,
they ignored it
that's
completely.
super complicated, right? That's why, like Hamilton.
I know
The Broadway show.
I was just stepping.
You were just setting me up. That is called. I don't use sports metaphors often because I usually mess them up, but that is an assist. Thank you for that, Josué. Hamilton, for those of you who might not be familiar, it's a Broadway show. It's going to be on Disney Plus like next month, I think, for Independence Day. Yeah, July. Yeah. So definitely check it out. But it is a Broadway show musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who you might know for In the Heights, which was a movie that was supposed to come out, but now it didn't because of coronavirus. So there's that. But Hamilton is a show about American history, and all the roles are white people, but it's been cast in an incredibly diverse way, where it's every person of every background is well, I don't want to say every background is featured there, but most of the cast is not white. It's a very diverse cast, and that is important because if you do this show and you want to remain true to the history, you're only going to cast white people. It's not true to what that experience was, but it is subvertive of it. You know, it's kind of speaks to the America now as opposed to the America then. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on things like that?
So there is no right or wrong way to do it. I say, look at it, check out how you feel, look at how it makes other people feel.
Right.
Because if you're the type of person who sees that and is like, I'm celebrating that diversity, that is fantastic. And someone comes up and says, well, you know, that's like, it was impossible. Like that was never possible. You can have many different conversations about that. You can have conversations about, well, why wasn't it possible? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. You might learn something. You can talk about why does it bother you? Why does it bother you?
Right.
You know, like, and depending on who you're having that conversation with, you can hear some things from people. You'll get some insights that I don't know. Like I don't have an opinion either way. I think it's cool, but I use things like that as conversation starters. Yeah. To me, it's an opportunity to have these conversations. I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Totally.
Like, oh yeah. No, it's like, wait a minute. And I love the idea that newer generations will be exposed to that history for the first time through rap lyrics and Hamilton.
Yeah.
And someone is going to say, someone is going to tell them, George Washington wasn't black. And they're going to say, what do you mean George Washington wasn't black? The only version of him that I've ever seen is black. And it's like, actually, well, he wasn't. You know, like imagine the amazing conversations that can come from that.
Well, and the beauty of, I didn't even speak to this, so thank you for bringing this up, but Hamilton also brings together different musical styles. So it's bringing together hip hop with Broadway show tunes, much like Lin-Manuel did with In the Heights, and that opens up different audiences to this experience. Like that's what's so cool about Hamilton is the audiences that see the show. Now it's a very expensive show, so there's socioeconomic stuff plays into it, and Broadway is also dark right now. Like there are no Broadway shows, which is why Disney Plus is accelerating the release of it. But the audiences who see the show are from all over, all different types of backgrounds because of all these different pieces. So I love that. I want to give a shout out to Night Angel DK. Night Angel has been on many episodes of Life Support Live. That's a Saturday show I do with my friend Larry Nemechek. So Night Angel, thanks for being here and there. And you were on last week's live stream on the Psych Show too. So thank you for that. The Blacklist. I've been watching The Blacklist with my boyfriend every night and by myself during the day, and I'm watching Travelers. Josué, I don't know The Blacklist or Travelers. Are you familiar with either of these shows?
Yes, I am.
So how do we
in the context of the show, rate their diversity?
Yeah.
They're very white cast, both of them. Yeah.
And do they speak to differences in communities and experiences and all of that?
The Blacklist is more about like espionage and government conspiracies and things like that. At least it was when I was watching it. And The Travelers, I believe, is way more sci-fi. Kind of, it sounds like Sliders to me. Remember Sliders?
Okay, I love Sliders.
Yeah. Or it has time travel. I'm a little confused. I know I haven't watched Travelers myself, but I remember like the I've seen the Netflix like thumbnails for it. Yeah.
Well, and Night Angel has a follow-up comment. If you have met one insert adjective here person, you have met one insert adjective here person, and I think that's true. Like you can't take an experience of meeting one person and apply it to a whole community. And that's one of the problems we have in America is you're just more likely to have more representation of people who are white in media, and you see a lot of diversity of experiences there, much less so with people of color, especially Black Americans. So I want to take us into the home stretch here, Josué, and I've got a question for everyone who is watching, and I want to know what is one thing that you recommend everyone watch? And I'm using watch loosely. It doesn't necessarily mean watch. It might be a video game to play. We haven't talked about video games. I know you are a big video game guy. It could be a song. It could be a YouTube vlog. It could be a podcast. But like, what's helped you this week? What's helping you develop compassion and understanding? And yeah, let's kind of go there. So Josué, I'm kind of wondering for you, like this whole conversation meaning what's happening in the world right now happened because of piece of media, because George Floyd's death was captured on video. And because of social media, it was shared around the world. And no matter what, you could not deny that this man was killed for no reason. He did not need to be killed in any way. No one needs to be killed, but there's no justification for it. So this whole conversation is actually starting because one piece of media.
Yeah. So I think the most important piece of media in the world right now is the video of George Floyd's death. And many conversations have come from that. And when I said earlier, all of the different ways that we can apply these ideas, I want you to think about a couple of them. That video, the perspective that we saw, like if you haven't seen the video, it's a horrible video. This is the example. I think it's the most important video in the world. I don't love that video, right? I never want to see that video or another video like it again. But we saw it and we're talking about it. And what things are people talking about? Well, one thing is, have you thought about who took that video? It was a 17-year-old girl named Darnella Frazier who took that video. Imagine being 17 years old, walking down the street, seeing that happen, being afraid. There's articles now she's talked about like, that was traumatic. She's going to therapy now. She's seeking help because that is not something that you see and you just get over. Imagine being the person holding the camera. That's a whole other set of conversation. A young person, 17 years old, just living your life. This happens. You decide, I'm going to record this because why? Why would you even record that? Would you have recorded it if you saw it? Maybe if this was something that you've thought about in the past, that you've seen in the past, that you think really matters and needs to be recorded and seen. Right? So that is Darnella's experience, right? And then, like I said before, listen to other people's reactions to that, right? So last night or yesterday during the day, Al Sharpton gave the eulogy at George Floyd's funeral. Or there was he gave a eulogy yesterday. And he said, George Floyd's story, meaning the video, right, is the story of black folks. Because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed to be is because you kept your knee on our neck. So he's taking the literal action. He's also taking it metaphorically. So imagine how many people saw that video and thought, that is my experience. My experience isn't that exact thing that happened, but I feel like that is what has happened to me and people who look like me and my family members and my friends since forever. That is the story that I've been told since I was a child, right? Wow. Since I was born. It's the only thing that I hear. And that is the clearest representation of it in a literal and metaphorical sense.
Yeah.
It was a black man in that video, and I'm telling you something that a black man said about the experience. That's why right now we're saying people step back, listen to black voices right now, because that story is representative of so much of the experience.
So I think this is something that I haven't heard too much this week is don't just look at this different media yourself, but look at how communities are responding to it and the conversations that are unfolding. So Josué, thank you for mentioning that, because some of the reactions to George Floyd video have been about trauma that Black Americans have said, I can't watch this because this has been my life. I can't, I struggle to deal with these thoughts because they've been, I've seen this happen so many times, and other people have said that's why this must be seen. So there's no right or wrong way to move forward with this and with that video specifically. But I never even thought about what is the emotional mental health experience. I've been so overwhelmed by that video that I never even thought to think about who recorded it and how this impacted them and why they might have recorded it, for what purpose. I want to share. So there's a few here. Carly just mentioned 13th on Netflix. Carly, Netflix made that free now. It is 13th, which is Ava DuVernay's documentary about the 13th Amendment and the abolishment of slavery, and how America really moved from enslaving Black people to imprisoning Black people. It's a really hard documentary to watch. It's an incredibly important documentary to watch. And I don't think we can really have conversations about racism in America if we don't have a shared understanding of the history that we are all dealing with. So if you only watch one piece of media to understand some of this history, I think it is 13th. And again, Netflix has made it free. I've got a link to it in the description below. It's now on YouTube. So that is definitely something worth watching. Josué, are there new voices that you have been exposed to this week that you want to recommend that people watch, that people need to see?
Yeah, so I mentioned TikTok earlier. I love TikTok. Yeah. And I TikTok has so you know how the YouTube has the suggestions at the beginning, right, in the front page? So TikTok has something called the For You page. And every minute is maximum, every video is maximum of 1 minute long. Mm-hmm. So on your For You page, it's an algorithm that's just pushing videos to you that they think they're recommending to you. And so I've seen so many Black creators sharing their stories and their opinions this week. So I recommend TikTok in general. I think it's a lot of fun. I think I've also learned a lot from TikTok, and it's a great place to get a lot of voices all at once. If you don't know where to start, you don't know where to look. There are lots of playlists now. People are sharing different videos. So I think I've seen so many. To be honest, I can't recall names, right? Because it's been a lot this week. It's been really good. Last night I went to a town hall, and one of the people who spoke mentioned How to Be Anti-Racist, the
Yeah.
book.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and I was like, oh, wait a minute, like, yeah, that sounds relevant to right now. And so I started listening to that also recently.
Insightful Eye says, I watched Roots when I was a teenager and it had a huge impact on my life. Insightful Eye, mind meld here. Roots was a big
Yeah.
part of my childhood. My family and I gathered every year whenever it aired on TV. It would air on TV like once a year. I think on like the Hallmark Channel or something like that. And my family and I would watch it, and it's like a 5-night or 10-night event. And it's really about chronicling one family, starting with Kunta Kinte, who is taken as a slave from Africa, and it's about his travel as a slave, being taken from Africa to America, and follows his family. And that was always just a part of my family's. It was a part of my family's story that we always watched this, and it was very important to my dad that we understand this experience and what has happened to Black Americans. So Roots was definitely one. For Josué, you mentioned Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he's a voice that I've been exposed to this week, who I did not know previously. He's a history professor at American University and has known for 2 books, Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be Anti-Racist. And Stamped from the Beginning is about how, as we make and I haven't read Stamped from the Beginning. I started the audiobook for How to Be Anti-Racist as well. I know you and I are both audiobook fans. But Stamped from the Beginning, I watched some of his talks about it, and it's really interesting because he talks about how, as we've made progress towards racial equality, racism has also made progress. So as we become more sophisticated in tackling problems of racism, racism has evolved and become more sophisticated in creating inequality. So that is one way of thinking about things that I haven't quite thought about before. But then How to Be Anti-Racist, one message that I got from him that has really resonated with me is thinking about racism not as an identity, like you are racist, I am racist, but more it's what we did and what we do. And we all are capable of doing racist things. We're all capable of doing anti-racist things. Sometimes we do both. Like reading about his or listening to his book has helped me to realize that one of the greatest dangers is doing nothing and being passive. And this gets to a video that I'm working on for this channel. But I've been in fear of talking about racism on this channel. And the reason is, early on in this channel, I made a couple of videos about discrimination and diversity in media. And you all don't see it because now I've got all this filtering set up. But I get a wave of hate, of comments, of some scary, some just mean, sometimes threatening. And it scared me. It scared me to not make those kind of videos. And I've realized that if I've made this platform, if I have this, if this community is here, what am I doing if I'm not standing up for equality and speaking up against racism? I'm part of the problem. So his book is helping me to understand that, and that's something I want to change.
I like the way that the book started, where he's talking about a speech that he gave, that he looks back on it and he says, I can't believe how racist everything I said there was. But here's why I said it. I understand that now, and I'm not doing that anymore, right? I'm doing things very, very differently.
Yeah. Rose is saying, I don't want to watch TV because it's always bad news or fighting and violence. That's why I'm looking at Instagram and YouTube. So I've got a couple of things there to recommend to you, Rose. On YouTube, I really want to highlight other voices here in the mental health space, and someone who, if you like my channel, you will definitely like Dr. Tracy Mark's channel. She's a Black psychiatrist and makes wonderful videos, and there's not many mental health people on YouTube, and of the mental health people on YouTube, there aren't many people of color, and there's very few Black American mental health YouTubers on YouTube. So she is someone who I really encourage people to watch and recommend. I've got. Can I share with you one, Josué? I know we're almost reaching the end here, but I want to share one video that really was really powerful for me. So have you ever heard of Belief in Fatherhood, the YouTube channel?
No.
Probably not. So neither had I. And it's a YouTube channel about it's a family vlogging YouTube channel. The difference, though, is it's a Black family. And I've often avoided watching family vloggers because it's so often like, here's our great life and here's all the things we're doing. But belief in
you said it's a Black family. It's like a family YouTube channel. There's lots of those, but this one's different because it's a Black family. It's like, oh, I guess there aren't that many, right? Within the grand scheme of things.
I don't know because of two things. Number one, YouTube is this vast space. It is actually hard to discover new voices. It's easy to get more of what you like, and YouTube's very good with their algorithm of like, oh, you watch this one video about the science of this starship from the Enterprise, here's 20 more from different YouTubers. But it's hard at like, oh, you might be interested in this other topic that you haven't explored. And so I know there's a lot of family vloggers. I don't know how many Black family vloggers there are, but I discovered this one, Belief in Fatherhood, via the Vlogbrothers. I think John Green linked to them in one of his recent videos. And so I started watching their content, and there's a video about we had the talk with our sons. Mm-hmm. And the father and mother here filmed themselves talking to, I believe they're 5 and 7-year-old or 7 and 9-year-old. I'm not sure, but these two sons, and they're talking to their sons about how some people might judge them because of the color of their skin. Yeah. And some people might see them as a threat. And you can't trust everyone, and you can't trust the police officers. And it broke my heart, Josué. I mean, as a dad myself, I connected with the dad in the video, and we so try to protect our kids. And we also so try to preserve their innocence, and their hope and optimism. And you see that innocence wash away as you're watching this video. And my gosh, like the amount, the impact it was very hard for me to sleep that night, because I was just thinking, if I was in this position, it would break my heart to have this conversation and to know that I have to. That like
eventually you will. Yeah.
So yeah. I recommend that video highly because it just gives you an understanding of how there's very few times in my life when people have seen me as a threat and a risk. It did happen after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Whenever I flew, I felt people being afraid of me, but that's not my everyday experience. And I never thought that my life was in danger. At most, I thought I might be inconvenienced or my civil liberties might be limited. I never thought my life was in danger. And this conversation just woke me up to that experience, not only as what a lot of Black men experience every day, but as a parent. It broke my heart, Josué.
Yeah, and again, like, we're not speaking for anyone who's Black right now. It doesn't matter how much we feel like we can relate to that experience. And some of these conversations are very hard. Like that video, it feels like it's, I don't know, like a few people mentioned at the beginning, The Hate U Give. I've never watched the movie because just the name makes me feel like it's an experience that I don't want to go through. Yeah. But right, and actually, Dr. Harry McCleary earlier, he actually put this quote up, his comment up earlier, but you read another one. It was about embracing the diversity in your already geek communities.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love that, because if you don't know where to start, right? This is one of the things that I think is really important. It's hard to, you want to understand other people. We can find connection, right? There are already things that we have in common. We showed that before when we were talking about science fiction. We were talking about Star Trek. We talked about video games. We already have that connection. If you go to a fan convention somewhere, you will see all different types of people who love the same thing you do. You already have something in common.
Yeah.
So on YouTube, for example, I love tech videos, right? It just so happens that Marquez Brownlee is one of my favorite ones, right? He's a Black creator.
Me too.
I mean, I think he's like the best, right? It just so happens he's Black, right? And yesterday on his channel, which never touches, that I remember, any current events or real world issues, he had a video reflection on the color of my skin, right? And it's a way of connecting. It's a way of easing us into or facing these conversations in places that we're already comfortable being. Like maybe someone else's video titled that, I don't want to see it. But that video from Marquez, I know Marquez. I like Marquez. I see Marquez every week.
You have a relationship with me. You have another.
I already have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
He wants to have that conversation with me. I'm way more open than maybe the family that you mentioned before, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not ready for that one yet, or maybe I want to go there, but I just can't do it. That story, like if you connect other things, like let's say you really liked the Black Panther movie, and then you started reading the Black Panther comics, and you started reading the new ones, which are written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and then you go and like, Ta-Nehisi Coates is an author. He wrote a book. It's called Between the World and Me, which is a letter that he wrote to his son, which sounds like the exact conversation that you described earlier. Right? So like we can connect these dots. We can find people, maybe people who love the things that you do already. We can find those connections and really say, oh, hey, look at this. Or are there any voices, like when we were talking about diversity before, like think about all the creators in this thing that you like. Because if we're talking about, your geek, your fandoms, what is that? Like I'm into Gundam models now, right? Like I'm building plastic model kits of robots. I started looking at everybody, and I found this guy, Gunplay University. He's not a big channel, Black creator. I like his videos. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm mindful of the fact that, oh, wait a minute, there are other voices out there. There are different experiences, and they open up these possibilities for new conversations. So, thank you, Dr. McClary, for that comment earlier.
That's such a great point. That is always a great starting point, is start with the diversity within our community. And something, Josué, you said that I'm going to take with me is then look at the conversation around it. The podcast dedicated to, you love Black Panther? Awesome. Read some reactions to it from within the Black community, from the Black diaspora. Listen to some podcast interviews about it. Look at video reactions from Black YouTubers. And with MKBHD, it was so powerful for me to hear him speak to this issue, because you're right, he never talks about this sort of stuff, and to hear that here's a way in which it's impacted my life, it just it was kind of a shock to me to get that, but it was the kind of shock I needed. But
I was willing to have the conversation, right? We were willing to hear him out because because it's Marquez. Like,
And Night Angel mentions that FBE has a video where their Black reactors tell their stories. So if you're not familiar, it's the Fine brothers, I think. And they're kind of really pioneered the whole reaction format. And you've seen their videos on YouTube where people react to different things. So that's one I'm going to check out. I haven't seen that one yet, but I will definitely check that out. There's so much more we could talk about, Josué, but I know I promised you an hour. You're a very busy person. So if you watch this video and you got something out of it, please share this with your community. We wanted to have this conversation to help people to connect, to cope, to develop compassion, and it's just a starting place. This isn't going to solve anything, but so many of us are struggling with, what do I do now? What do I do next? And I think this is an easy next step for a lot of us. Easy in terms of it's something we can do by ourselves when we're at home and we're otherwise isolated from each other. Josué, if people want more Geek Therapy, if people want more from you, where can they find your work? Where can they find you?
geektherapy.com, and you'll find links to all of our podcasts. We have many different ones.
A lot.
Yeah, we have various communities on Facebook, on Discord. We have a forum online. We'd love to have you if you think seeing the world through media has some merits that it can help us out. We all believe it does. So you're welcome to join us.
And I, of course, you can find me right here. You're already here. So just, if you haven't yet subscribed to the Psych Show, you'll get more stuff. I'm working on my own video about my experience with everything that's been going on. Look for that on Monday. It's taken me a long time to do because I want to do it right. And even if I do it right, I'm probably going to make some mistakes. So please be patient and compassionate with me. And just a little preview, I am working on developing a morning show for you all. The feedback about these live streams has been awesome. So hopefully that'll be coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. So thank you, everyone, for this awesome live stream. Thank you, Josué, for being here. Always love having you on the channel. And yeah, I should have a sign-off. I don't. So thanks for being part of the Mighty Psyche, everyone. See you next time.